And about you, were you a kind of born climate realist, or at what time did you change your mind, or did you understood that something went wrong?
Right. So I think it's important to understand I had a 25 or 30-year career doing other kinds of science before 1990, predominantly nuclear physics, particle physics, in addition to computer modeling of those subjects. And so I did not come to the field of climate science without any previous experience in some of the tools that are used. I come at it, physicists, particularly theoretical physicists, like to say that we can poke our nose into anybody's business. And we have the tools, modeling, understanding of data, and so on. And so I brought that attitude into climate science. It's not as though I grew up in the field, but it means I have a very maybe different perspective on the field about the importance of agreement with data, about uncertainties in projections and understanding and so on, than if I had been trained as in one of the more classic disciplines of climate science.
And so at what time did you realize that something went wrong?
I think my real understanding of the differences, the difficulties in climate science dates from about 2013 or 2014, when I was asked by the American Physical Society to chair a committee that would look at the society's statement about climate change, climate science.
So at what point did you realize that something went wrong in the climate science?
I think the first time I started to realize that climate science was less settled than I had thought previously was in early 2014, just about 8 or 9 years ago, when the American Physical Society, which is the professional society of 50,000 physicists, asked me to help rewrite their statement on climate change, which was at that point about 7 years old and needed to be refreshed. And because physicists like to do things themselves, I decided we were just not going to take the word of the IPCC, which had just come out with its 5th assessment report, but rather we would do a hard look at the science itself, as described by the IPCC. And so I convened a one-day workshop of 3 people supporting the consensus and 3 scientists who were somewhat skeptical of the consensus or would challenge it.
And at that time you were neutral in the debate?
I was neutral. I was, show me the evidence for and against. And what I came to realize was that the science was not as settled, as agreed upon as I had realized. Some aspects were that the Earth was warming, that carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases more generally emitted by humans was playing a role, that most of the increase in the greenhouse gases that we've seen over the last 100 years was due to burning of fossil fuels. But quite open was how much the temperature would rise as a result of continued emissions and what other changes we would see in climate metrics beyond just a temperature rise. And there was, I would say, considerable credible disagreement. The models were all over the place. The economic impacts were projected to be small. At the time, we weren't seeing many changes in storms and so on. So I started to realize that the catastrophic narrative was not very well supported by the science.
Mm-hmm. But well, let's put it straight. You worked for big oil, so you have vested interests. You're in denying the climate crisis. You just don't care for the future, for the children, for the planet, and all that you want is to make money on sending fuel, right? Could you elaborate on this?
Yes. So I did spend 5 years as chief scientist for BP, mm-hmm. and I came into the position knowing nothing about energy, except that as a physicist I knew energy was conserved. And I really learned the energy business as well as the energy landscape. I was brought into the company not to help them find oil and gas or produce it. They were doing that perfectly well on their own. But I was brought in to help them figure out what beyond petroleum really meant. Renewables, alternatives to oil and gas, and so on. I think I did that, and that understanding and experience was very valuable as I moved into a government position afterward, and then subsequently as I've been out talking publicly about those matters. But today I have no interest in oil company stocks at all. I do talk to many energy companies, both traditional and new energy technologies. I tell them all the same story, and I tell them the same story that I tell the public. So I like to think that I've been pretty straight as far as my discussion of the science and the lack of conflicts of interest.
You probably know that it is difficult to sell this message to the general public, because there is a general feeling that anyone who just put a finger into this kind of company is discredited forever.
One of the problems we have in trying to move on the energy transition is that the people who actually build and operate the energy system and know something about it firsthand are dismissed in ways that you've just described. And so, as I hope we'll get onto at some point, the energy system, the energy transition is not going particularly well.